We'll go ahead and get our meeting scheduled. Online here. I think for simplicity, we'll skip number 1 for introductions. Item 2 is approval of July 13th, 2023 meeting minutes. Motion to approve those.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passage. Okay, we'll go to number 3. This is the time in our agenda where citizens have the opportunity to address this body of any concerns or issues that they have regarding public works, streets, those kinds of issues. So please come forward, just state your name and purpose of why you're here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Rick Petty.
Mr. Petty, you can go to the podium right there, or unless you want to come.
No, you're good.
Okay.
No.
Good morning. Thank you for being
I
here.
guess our group is here just to get an update or some findings on the roundabout that's being proposed for the Brandy Lane Stadium area. I think that's our main concern. We just would like an update in how this was come about, to what are the plans. Everybody's kind of hearing it through, lack of better words, the grapevine. See the survey crew there, no notification this is going to happen, and we're just trying to get an update on where we're at and what's the procedure to go forward.
We might have you stand in reserve here to, Danny, do you have any information?
Certainly we have some slides if we would like to kind of go through those and kind of talk about the process if we'd like.
Sure, absolutely.
It was, I think it was called Stadium.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. While we're waiting on that, if you have some comments.
My name is Marvin Phillips. I live on Brandy Lane, and I can probably give you a little bit of history. Back in November 2020, I conversed with Matt Marash about sight distance at the intersection of Satinwood and Stadium. And my concern at that time was the fact that when you come off of Satinwood, heading south, turning to the right to go like toward Walmart, Jefferson, and JMC, the sight distance to the left on Stadium is just almost blocked. There's a traffic signal box right there, and then the first property to the left, and then the next one down, they have a humongous amount of shrubs located in the fence line, which is the right-of-way line for the stadium. And there's enough curve there that it's hard to see when it's clear. And naturally, you can turn right on a red. Otherwise, you wait for the green. And the way the intersection was built with the island on the Satinwood side, channeled you to the right like this so that you had to really look left. And I personally noted that about 6 times I thought it was clear, and when I pulled out, next thing I know, I was almost rear-ended by traffic heading westbound. And so anyway, I made a suggestion to the city. They came out and checked it out. They contacted the property owner that had all the shrubs, and the property owner was not receptive to removing the shrubs. And so the city determined all they could do was chop off the shrubs at the fence line, which they did. It helped a little bit, but it didn't cure the problem. But they also came in later and removed the islands in the intersection on the Satinwood side over near Brandy Lane. And that helped a lot because you could move your vehicle in a position where you could see a little bit better. You could also move up farther up so you could see. And sometimes the traffic through there, even on a green light, it's doing more than 40 miles an hour, I'm sure. And so we suggested maybe lowering the speed limit, but that city wasn't receptive to that either. So that's kind of how my involvement anyway with this problem. For one thing, I thought the signal box for this lighted intersection was probably in the wrong location. I don't know why they put it there, because it truly, in my view, when I pull up to the intersection, I had a window about this wide to look down as much as a couple hundred yards to see if there was anybody coming. And I don't know, I just felt like something needs to be done. And of course, others can tell you on the block about the flooding problem, but and we were involved with that a little bit several years ago. So, but anyway, that's my involvement, and I'm glad to see that there's something being maybe proposed here. So,
Thank you very much for your time this morning. Mr. Bangy, you want to proceed with, or?
Yeah, just to tee it up just briefly, obviously David's got a master plan. We've kind of planned a corridor along Stadium, and this just for the residents maybe too, is that, there's been a master plan developed for Stadium in the sales tax a few years back. There's a lot of projects there. None were necessarily decided upon, in the end, but that would be a good plan overall. A lot of sidewalks, there's no sidewalks, there's lack of a lot of things. It's one of our heaviest traveled corridors in the city. We do note the geometry problem Marvin and I talked about a long time ago, and on this particular intersection. Then we had a flooding problem over the years, multiple floods through there. Cars would get stranded, they can't see it, et cetera, et cetera. And so that all coupled with our sales tax to work on the Stadium corridor, we were looking for a project that seemed to fit the funding available, hit a couple problems. One is geometry of this intersection, speeding along the corridor, and flood control. And so that kind of hit a lot of problems in one location. So it kind of rose to the top when we suggested this project and to help with all those things. So that's kind of how it got here. And I'll turn it over to David.
Yeah, and so there's been efforts in many different areas along this corridor. Certainly if we were to start kind of in the upper left-hand corner, that this is the intersection of Edgewood and Stadium, and then Creek Trail and Stadium. And so some years ago, 5 years ago, when we redid Creek Trail and tied that into Frog Hollow, there was a traffic study that was done that identified this as a solution to the traffic issue in the closely spaced intersections. And so that's a plan that we have. GBA has put that plan together for us. Kind of on the other end of the project, or other end of the street, this is Myrtle, so right by Helias. And so back when the sports facility was built for Helias a couple of years ago, there was an agreement that was made with the high school, with Helias, for them to donate right-of-way to us, in the event that we would need to do, some sort of improvements at that intersection. At the intersection here with Southwest Boulevard, again, we had a TEEP study that was done. CBB out of St. Louis did that for us and ultimately identified several different possible improvements to this intersection. And so again, there's been some work done there. And then, of course, the intersection that we were talking about now, certainly that intersection was discussed when we had Bar Engineering look at the flood study that basically encompassed this whole drainage area that came down and went through this intersection. So there's been work that's been done in all these places. And certainly, as Matt kind of indicated, we were just, looking at, since it was, an item within the sales tax, we were looking along this corridor, which one of these projects, would have the largest impact with the funding that we have available to us. And another aspect of the project there at Satinwood and Stadium is that we had the, I'm going the wrong way. We had the opportunity of looking at the possibility of a transportation alternatives program grant, which would allow us to connect some of the greenway system that we have that exists right here just off the corner of JCMG, would allow us to bring that trail through this intersection, and then ultimately plans for that to go continue up Stadium Boulevard, and then also come and continue up towards the Colonial Hills subdivision. And so there's a lot of positives about this particular project as part of that larger corridor improvement. And so that's kind of where the project originated.
Of course, on this diagram, one of the biggest negatives, obviously, when you do any big project, we discussed this on Monroe the other day, it's going to affect property if we're going to do it. And so that's unfortunate. And, but we do try to make those property owners whole and, relocation costs and buyouts and things like that. So we negotiate with those property owners. So this is still in the planning stage. And so, anytime we talk about anything at the city council, it probably makes the newspaper, people hear about it. We have to send surveyors out to kind of get the lay of the land to make sure we're not, we're not designing something that won't actually fit there or work. So that's kind of what it is. So we haven't really got going with the design. We're still in the preliminary stage and applying for grants at this point. But we want to be upfront about it and say, if we're going to do this and try to get these grants, it will affect some property there, and you can clearly see it on the map. So that's kind of the stage we're in. I think the grants are due for, and the grants are just for the sidewalk improvements, essentially, part of this. And those are due a couple weeks, I think.
Right. It would, yes, the 24th of August.
And I won't speak on behalf of the citizens. I think what I'm hearing is a concern of the design of doing a roundabout, which is more of a feel for a commercial area, and that seems to be where we've kind of utilized that model, that solution, if you will, more on a commercial aspect. And there's a lot of residential here. So we need to continue on with the testimony. Mr. Petty, you have anything more? Make sure we're all on the same page as understanding on in this video. There is no final design on any of this, so there is an avenue for other design alternatives, correct?
There is other avenues that are being explored. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, this is our master plan now for this grant. If this were to fall apart or the council doesn't want to do it, then we would have to go back and look at, there's always options. You could do nothing. You could, but you wouldn't be ticking all the boxes. So.
Okay, so again, let's go back to the master plan. The grants would be for the Greenway Trail, not for the actual roundabout.
Well, not for the actual pavement on the roundabout, but it would work within this footprint.
So we are looking at possible other alternatives than a roundabout.
At this point, we're focused on this roundabout for this grant. Now, if the council doesn't want to do it or whatever, anything's possible. Still, this is still lines on paper, like I always say. Until the final contract comes, it's not settled, But just on the corridor, as you can see, we got roundabouts on either end, roundabout solutions proposed up and down the thing. It just makes, and it does have a good effect on traffic calming, which is a big concern here. So if the box culvert were to go in, this whole thing gets obliterated anyway to get it in there. So we're starting ground zero basically at that point. We know some of the residents flood, so
Some of the residents flood.
some of the residential places there have flooded in the past. Yes.
In the past, about 10 years ago, I believe it was. I believe it was
16 might have been the flood for that.
I guess I think it's pretty well has been taken care of for the flooding part of it. We haven't had it for a while. That was just one of those once in 10-year deals. I mean, my yard was affected because of Burley coming down. Still got problems sometimes with the water coming up against the house, but the intersection hasn't flooded.
Well, it hasn't flooded since, but it flooded three times.
Three times.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mike, appreciate the opportunity, gives us a little update on what to think about. Again, not hearing anything about it, seeing it, and then everything being hearsay, hearsay, hearsay. We're just trying to figure out where we're at on things.
And I think they were under the assumption that it was already done and we'll move forward. I mean, I think that was most of the issues.
Yeah,
Just state your name.
Yeah, Michael Rehagen, 2215 Brandy Lane. I bought the property in '76 for $4,400, built a house in '78, and been there ever since. So I've seen a lot of the changes that have occurred. When I bought that property, the right-of-way was indicated on the land that I bought for stadium to come behind me. I knew that that was going to happen, so bought the property with that understanding. But I think what's interesting about this whole process that's going on now is what was said a while ago is one of the things that hits my mind as well. Roundabouts have primarily been used in commercial or a non-residential area. This is a residential area, and it's going to affect our values of our property. It's going to affect, in other words, John possibly losing his house, a senior citizen, 75 years old, not wanting to move, pushing him out at that point. And I asked staff, city staff, once and twice and 3 times, is this because of speed control? Oh, no. It has nothing to do with speed control. But I'm hearing speed control being part of the process that was part of what would be accomplished by this roundabout is the speed. I realize and agree that the speed coming down that hill with dump trucks carrying rock or going up the hill is excessive and it's dangerous. But that's an enforcement problem. That's not a problem that should be dealt with by interfering with our neighborhood that we've got and converting it to almost an appearance of a commercial area. If you want to fix the angle of the intersection, fine, I understand that. But that's the way it was built by the city back in '79, '78, in that era, and it's been there ever since. But there's other options I think you should explore. Straightening the intersection, I think you could acquire, my understanding from one of your city staff, that you could acquire some land that would be, if you will, pantywampus from the the stadium and Satinwood intersection, where there's some trees and it's on what I would consider to be the southwest corner of the intersection, and you could straighten that intersection out by coming that direction instead of doing a roundabout. I think the roundabout will also create, whenever you've got nighttime traffic, we're going to see lights hitting our bedroom windows, our living room windows constantly all evening, because that thing is almost going to be in our front yard, our backyard, whichever direction you're standing. So I would encourage some other options. I understand that this is the only option that's been given to the council at this point, and that concerns me that there's not other options out there. If you want to change the angle and do something other than a roundabout, it still could be a residential area at that point. So that's all I have at this point.
Thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you.
State your name.
Good morning, my name is Eric Weddle, and I am at 2224 Brandy Lane, which is just across the street from where the very first house on the corner, from where the proposed roundabout might go. First of all, thank you very much, committee, for giving us the opportunity to come and speak on this issue. I'd first like to acknowledge David Bangy, and thanks for reaching out to me, David. Sorry I haven't gotten back to you, but I certainly, obviously, am interested in this situation that's developing. I've been at my residence for about 17 years or so, and I think the first thing I'd like to address is kind of the flooding issue. I remember when I moved in, there were the drains that were in the street. And that particular area right there, as you go on to Satinwood from Stadium, and in that little corridor where Brandy Lane and Satinwood meet right there, there certainly was an issue. I remember standing out there at that corner of Satinwood and Brandy Lane for years and years and years with my rain boots on and my rake. And I kept that flooding down from raking off the grates. And the stormwater updates that have been made to that intersection right there have been an immense improvement. I have not seen any flooding. As a matter of fact, with all of this rain that we just recently got, I would walk over there to Wares Creek and look down in there. And while it was full, it never appeared to me that it was gonna come out of the banks or anything like that. And we got quite a bit of rain. Now I know that the one that we're talking about, prior to where there were some people that were stranded and things like that, there was a 100-year flood or whatever. But I certainly applaud the city for those improvements, and I think they've helped a lot. Moving on to the roundabout, there are multiple concerns that I have. Of course, I echo the sentiments of my neighbors. And first and foremost, I am opposed to a roundabout that would require the removal of the home at 2223 Brandy Lane. There's a couple reasons for that. The first is John Arrangi, who lives there, is not only my neighbor, but my friend, and he is a senior citizen. And speaking on his behalf, his approval, he is opposed, he doesn't want to move, and that scares him to death. The second thing is I think about the proximity of the roundabout and the traffic to my home. And as people come around that, if you look at the orientation of the front of my house, any traffic coming around that roundabout is absolutely going to go right into my living room and right into both of my kids' rooms, as far as headlights and things like that. Additionally, I believe that the removal of that home for the roundabout, that home creates a buffer for us. There are multiple mature trees on that property, and taking that away not only I believe will increase the visibility for us that are right there, the first couple of houses on Brandy Lane, including Mike's home, how close that is going to be, and we're going to see that traffic essentially right outside of my front yard. Also, if you haven't been in that area, the sidewalks, I think, could be a good idea. There's a lot of transient people that travel through that little corridor right there. Additionally, what I also see specifically in the wintertime is those culverts that go under Stadium Drive. The transients go under there and they start fires, and I guess they get under there for shelter and things like that, but I've seen it multiple times. As a matter of fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I had to call JCPD because a deranged man came to the front of my house, came to my door and said, "Hey, I need for you to call JCPD. I need a ride for my, to get my son." And I said, "Okay." I said, "You go to the street," and he started taking his clothes off in the street and things like that. And it was a bizarre issue. So certainly I think that, I agree with the enforcement issue, and certainly the speed of cars that, or traffic that come through that corridor is excessive. I do remember when I moved in, the speed limit coming down Stadium, I think, was 35. And that was obviously increased to 40. But I know that traffic along that stretch goes much, much faster than that. And you would think that it would be just an issue coming down that big hill from Stadium, but quite frankly, it goes both ways. Because in the morning at about 6:45, 7 o'clock, when I'm letting the dogs out, not only are the dump trucks, but also general traffic. And I try to think about this in my mind coming from the next intersection down. Is that how fast those cars are going by the time they hit, the Satinwood intersection, coming up the hill. There are times that I see people that will pass pass cars in the intersection, people blow through the lights, things like that. So I agree that there's certainly an issue with speed at that intersection, and it comes in, in all forms. And so I certainly think that a concerted effort for enforcement at that intersection could help. Maybe one of the cameras that, if they capture you speeding and you start electronically sending out some tickets, might send a message, especially to, some of those dump trucks and people that, really, really go fast down that intersection. I hope that there are, that the committee and would look at other options as opposed to, I'm not opposed to a roundabout, but what I'm opposed to is the removal of that home. That is a beautiful piece of property. I know that home is in good standing, and it would be a tragedy to displace the arrangees from that property, to remove that beautiful home. And I support the committee and the city on improvements right there, but I can't support a roundabout. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I don't want to stifle anybody from speaking, but if you think the sentiments has been shared already this morning, we can make sure that, we get your name and that you have concerns about the project. But if you do want to speak, I don't want to stop you from doing that. So if you had your hand raised, you're more than welcome to speak, but just wanted to lay that out there for you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Roxanne Bly, and I own 2206 Brandy Lane. My husband and I purchased that in 2017, and one of the things that attracted us to the neighborhood is, despite its proximity to Stadium, it's relatively secluded, and yet it has easy access to Stadium and shopping and other amenities that our town has to offer. The concern I have about the roundabout design is, typically I understood it was used in areas where the traffic flow is even from both directions. We don't have a lot of cross traffic on Satinwood going north and southbound. At Stadium is very busy. So my concern would be entering and exiting the neighborhood, being able to access that traffic circle, and then also the learning curve that other drivers experience when they use the roundabout. I used the roundabout on Jefferson and Stadium to get here today. I was in the outside lane because I was exiting on Jefferson, and somebody cut me off, failed to yield to the people in the circle. So I have safety concerns, accessing the neighborhood, and the way it would change the character of the neighborhood. Demolishing that home at the end of the street, I would actually describe that as catastrophic, because it does have a secluded character even though we're close to the street. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Paulette Rehagen, 2215 Brandy Lane. Just a couple of quick things. Yes, that is a heavily traveled intersection. However, with the 179 extension several years ago, that significantly decreased the amount of traffic behind our homes. So I just want to mention that. We originally did not have stoplights, so we have the stoplights. That has helped, and we have a crosswalk there for students who walk across to Cedar Hill School. So I'm a little concerned about what would happen with a roundabout and how the children would cross there. The other thing that I would like to say is I've spoken to every household on Brandy Lane except for one that I wasn't able to reach. And every single resident on the street is opposed, as to some others who are on Satinwood. And as I went around and it reminded neighbors of the meeting this morning, as I stood on where Eric lives in the next two houses and spoke to those neighbors, as I stood on their front porch and looked, their front yard view would be the roundabout. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips.
Yes, Marvin Phillips, 2205 Brandy Lane. One other comment about the speed. I know I mentioned that sort of lightly a while ago, but when you stop and think about Stadium, especially coming from Southwest Boulevard down. It's a downhill all the way. When you compare it with Southwest Boulevard from the intersection of Stadium going to Missouri Boulevard, Southwest Boulevard has a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit down that hill, and that is a super long hill, just like Stadium. And yet Stadium's got a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. And it's kind of hard for people to understand, not just from engineering standpoint, but from just observing why you would have two similar streets with that much difference in speed limit. And that's why I proposed early on, try to slow down the speed, because you are coming in that curve. It's kind of a gradual curve to some people, but it's enough to cause a sight distance problem. And that was my chief safety concern. So, thank you.
Point well taken. Thank you. Any comments from the committee? Any other comments from staff regarding this issue?
Yeah, we certainly heard the testimony, and we can go back and look and see what else can be done here, and maybe get a group of the homeowners together to work with us on it and see where we can get.
That'd be great. And I think if any of you that are here this morning are interested in serving in that capacity with staff, working with staff, let them know. I think that would be a comfort level for the community as well.
Yeah, and then as far as the grant goes, we still like to move forward with a grant and, try to get to, I think the grant mainly does show it going through like this, but we could probably work with the agency to say, we're trying to get to point A to B and see if we can still get that grant or not. So I think there's a good opportunity for the grant. We were very close in the last go around, so I'd hate to pass up those funds that might be available to the city.
And I heard you say this morning that that grant is due in 2 weeks. Okay, had none of us gone out and spoken to the people who were surveying, when we saw them surveying, we still wouldn't know anything about this proposal, and it would have been submitted to the city council without us being aware.
Well, if we were to get the grant, then there'd have to be a process design, and we have public meetings and so forth and so on. Usually at least one, if not two, through that process. David's group handles that typically.
Right. I mean, it's as Matt kind of indicated, this project is kind of in its infancy, and so without having something to show someone, it's hard to talk about what it is that we're doing. And so, in some ways, I mean, there has to be some sort of, and certainly, I don't know, how do we allow the council an opportunity to look at a project, who knows first? Do we tell the public first, or do we tell the council? So in some ways it's difficult beginning. But since it was,
and I will say also, certainly there's no necessarily money tied to this intersection. We picked it because we thought it was a good grant opportunity. It hit a lot of things. Our sales tax money says work on Stadium Boulevard, do some things on Stadium Boulevard. So if the neighborhood or the community doesn't want to see this, let's say, maybe there's a different project we work on Stadium Boulevard. Could we go up the hill? We could do whatever. There's not a lack of projects on Stadium Boulevard. I can tell you that.
I don't think the sentiment here this morning is that they don't want any improvements made.
Right.
I think flood control is a concern still, and sightline distances. But Mr. Phillips, you had a question for staff?
Yeah. My question is, if you don't get secure the grant for a green lane, are you still considering an intersection?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, the council they haven't really decided on anything. We're just proposing things to them and trying, I hate to use the term fishing for grant money. I mean, we always try to look at these projects and say, okay, is there a way we can stretch those city dollars further by applying for grants and trying to add on to these projects? And you can still do the same project. We'd have to sit and spend all local funding. Now, this is a city-county project, by the way, so it's a city-county cooperative funding source. But every time we do one, we always try to look at there's a grant up.
Looking at your preliminary drawing there, I just had a little bit of question along Stadium. You show a sidewalk on one side and greenway on the other. Well, if you have a greenway on one side, that's like a 8-foot wide
by the sidewalk. Why would you need a sidewalk on the other side? You can have access at the intersection.
So, I mean, for instance, the folks on Linwood, we probably wouldn't want them to come out of Linwood and walk directly across the street to get to the Greenway. We would probably prefer them to walk down to the intersection and cross there to get to the Greenway. I mean, so particularly on a busy street like Stadium, you wouldn't necessarily want people to just walk across the street at any location to get to the sidewalk on the other side.
I know they walk down Stadium now.
Well, that's a very good point. That's another reason that we're looking at this corridor. You know, we know that the high school cross-country kids run up and down Stadium. You know, so, you know, part of the master plan that we had, you know, was to build a greenway trail that would, again, be ADA compliant and would connect, you know, basically, would connect down through the property that Cap Region owns, and so that you could get those people off of Stadium Boulevard. I mean, so there's, you know, the plan is larger than just this intersection. And so, but again, it takes time, it takes money to get those things done. So, but this was the starting point, again, because it sort of ticked more boxes perhaps than some others. And again, just looking, you know, each one of these projects, you know, is going to affect properties, so obviously this intersection, you know, the Louse house is right there. You know, so that, again, if we look at that project, that's going to have to buy property. You know, if we do something like this at Southwest, obviously there's all kinds of properties that are affected by that. 2 commercial properties, probably 4 residential properties. You know, if we look at the one at Stadium, you know, obviously that's going to impact residential properties too. And I believe that Mike and Paula, her mother, lives in the house there, you know, that's impacted by this one. So, so each one of these projects, if we're going to proceed with any of them, are going to have property impacts.
You could do it without a roundabout in our particular
A roundabout would probably serve the traffic needs the best.
But something other than a roundabout could be used to accomplish much of what you're wanting to do.
Yeah, we'll just have to go back and look at it.
Councilman Spicer.
Like I stated earlier, the residents here, they were under the assumption this was already a done deal and it's already moving forward. And when you get 40 phone calls and you don't know where we're at with it, it kind of throws you off. And I don't know where they got their information from that this was a done deal and this was moving forward. That's their main concern. John, the gentleman they were talking about, he's persistent, good guy, persistent. I totally understand where he's coming from, and to a situation when you get phone calls and his house is going to be torn down and he ain't going to have a place to live, and from my perspective, it's like, hey, I don't know all this here because it hasn't came to us. I know you guys are working on grants to try to do something, but no proposal has come to the council to know which direction we're heading or whatever, so definitely understand their concerns. So that's why I wanted them to come and explain to you guys, hey, this is, it is their home and it is a residential area and they should have some say so. They've been there for a long time. So I think that setting up a committee or whatever you guys want to do with them and working together and fixing the solution is where I recommend this heads. Thank you.
And, it's still in its infancy, as you say, and it still needs to come before this body as well. So there should be some layers of accountability and those kinds of things and communication as well. So, but thank you, staff, for kind of getting this information out as best you can. And I think you have some good citizens here that are willing to participate on this issue. So again, thank you all for coming this morning.
Oh, hold on one second. Mike had a question.
I've listened and understand the concerns. I just want to hear from staff why they proposed a roundabout. My understanding is they do offer
more safety, there's less accidents from vehicles, but what, I mean, look, there's a lot of roundabouts here, why a roundabout?
All those things.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons that the roundabout is being chosen. Certainly, the volumes of traffic, and I think someone mentioned, the volumes of traffic. Certainly, there is a higher number of vehicles along Stadium Boulevard than there are on Satinwood. But I don't think the difference between those two would be a negative impact to this. We've talked about speeds. Well, that's not necessarily the reason for this choice, but obviously it is going to have an impact on the speed of traffic through this area. There's been discussions about, roundabouts don't happen in residential neighborhoods, but that's not actually true. We actually have one just up the hill from here that was purposefully built in a residential neighborhood. Up in the, some very nice houses. So I don't think that that's roundabouts aren't necessarily just built for commercial purposes. But in some ways, the location of this one is nice in that it does actually create a break between what is commercial properties along Stadium, obviously JCMG, the veterinary clinic, doctor's offices, and various and sundry things that are being built along the street. It makes a nice visual break between those two. It does provide us the opportunity to straighten out some of the kink that's in that intersection. Right now, that intersection is pretty skewed, and so again, I think that complicates some of the sight distance issues that were discussed today. And so having a roundabout there, we can address some of those issues and allows us to sort of better handle the traffic through that skew. And because it's skewed, that intersection doesn't actually work very efficiently with a traffic signal because the intersection is so long. You have a lot of dead time between the cycles. So if you had a roundabout, you would eliminate that dead time in that signal, and so you'd be able to get more cars through this intersection with a roundabout than with this traffic signal. And it does. We are going to have to, if we're going to fix the stormwater problem, we're going to have to destroy that intersection anyway. And so going back with something that's would be better than a traffic signal, I think this is the opportune time to do that. And so for those reasons, that's why we're suggesting.
Scott, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Glenn Fry, I'm a brain lane also. Do roundabouts slow down ambulances and fire trucks? How do they feel about that?
Well, this would be, right. This corridor already has 4 roundabouts on it already. We haven't heard any issues with.
The reason I ask is because a lot of them come from the region and they go up the hill to Jefferson up there. So they have to come through the intersection. And I would think that a roundabout would slow that down also.
Well, ultimately, if an ambulance were to come up to the intersection currently and the light for them is red, while they can drive through that roundabout, drive through the red light, they're slowing down to ensure that everyone else has stopped. And so, to some degree, I don't think the difference in their travel time would be all that great.
Well, thank you all again for participating this morning. Thank you for hearing your comments. You all have a great rest of your day. Oh, great. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, man.
Yes, Mark, how are you? Oh, great.
All right, we'll move.
I recognize you. That's what have an impact.
We'll move on to the next item under new business, which is transit, Mr. Stegman.
Yeah, I'll tee this up real quick. Jerry's got a pretty long presentation that we put in the packet just so we cover all the information. So I asked him to go through it pretty quickly. I know probably time is a little short this morning and we got budget meetings later, but if you have a question, just slow us down.
Get out of your way.
First thing we talk about is bus fleet, or it's two different types of services. What we have our fixed route services and we have our handy wheel service that we do. The handy wheels is a complimentary service for the people who can't ride the fixed routes. But on our fixed routes, we have 12 buses that are rather old. I mean, 8 of them are, they're 32 passenger buses, 4 of them are 26 passenger buses. They range anywhere from 18 to 11 years old, anywhere from 370 to over 400,000 miles on them. We have all Gillig buses, which is kind of the workhorse of the transit industry. You'll find most of them have at least a large portion of their bus fleet. The useful life for those buses is about 12 to 14 years and about 500,000 miles, whichever one comes first. Currently, we do have 2 hybrid Gillig buses ordered. Should have hopefully those in service at the beginning of 2024. Over to our handy wheel fleet, we've got 10 450 cutaway buses. They range anywhere from 2010 to 2017 models, anywhere from 130,000 to 285,000. Currently, the big thing with that is those types of vehicles are very hard to come by due to the pandemic and inflation and everything else, the state contracts and everything. The prices change and the availability is very limited. On those buses, as we talked there, the useful life of those buses is usually about 5 years, anywhere from 5 to 10 years, and 150,000 miles. As you can see, we have 2 buses that are at 130,000. Everything else is over that 150,000 mark. We're also trying to diversify our handy wheels fleet. If we can get a hold of some, we've been approved for grants to get 2 high top vans, which will increase our gas mileage and make it a little more maneuverable to get around town. All of our vans are handicap accessible. Next, talk about our Jeff-Tran routes, the fixed route system. We have 6 regular routes we travel on a 40-minute headway that makes 17 trips a day. Currently, with our driver shortage, we're combining 4 of those routes. So they have an 80-minute headway on 4 of them. 2 of the orange route and the black route are running on their normal schedule. During school time, we have 3 trippers we run just once a day at the end of the day for school kids to offer them a way home. Hours of service, we run from 6:40 in the morning to 6 p.m. at night. Our bus routes cover 83% of the city. And on our fixed routes, we do about 180,000 rides predicted for this year. That's down ever since the pandemic. It really hasn't come back too much. Next slide's going pretty quick. This is our Missouri Boulevard route. Kind of explains what it does. It leaves our station, more or less cuts through Broadway, heads down Myrtle back to the Boulevard and covers that section. It's our main route. It kind of, all the other routes feed to the Missouri Boulevard route because it gets to, Missouri Boulevard's the main thing in town. Next route's our black route. It services the west part of town. It goes from where Missouri Boulevard stops, heads out west, out by the fairgrounds, and touches close to Westview Heights and the Capitol Mall. Our next route is our blue route. That kind of covers the southwest part of town. Our red route covers the east part of town. And then we go to our gold route. It covers kind of the High Street area and the west side of town. Then our green route, it covers part of High Street, and then it covers the southeast part of town. Our next one here is our tripper routes, which we just run once a day, but we cover pretty much most of the areas of town for the schools in order to get the kids into their neighborhoods. Our next section is our handy wheel service. It's a complimentary paratransit service. It's complimentary to the fixed routes, and that's for people with disabilities. It also runs the same time of 6:40 to 6 o'clock in the evenings. We only operate inside the city limits. Individuals, they must be approved There's a approval process to be on the handy wheel service. Right now, we're looking at about 52,000 rides this year, which is up about another 3,000 over last year. Our next section is a breakdown of what our employees do. We have 31 employees, combination of part-time and full-time. Our staff is an older workforce. A lot of our drivers have, it's kind of their second career. Like myself, I was, place I was at shut down and I came to work for the city. It's been a great opportunity. We have other people that's been in construction that decided that, they couldn't do another 10 or 15 years of heavy construction. Our breakdown of employees, well, we have 20 full-time drivers. It says currently here 2 vacancies. Actually, we had one guy start last week, so we're down to 1. We have 2 communication operators. They're the ones that man the phones and cover stuff there. We have 4 administrative staff, which we currently have 1 open. It's been open for almost past year since Mark Lehman's retirement. We have 1 service worker that is part-time with benefits down in our bus barn. We also have 2 other service workers that work part-time down in our bus barn. And we have 1 custodian.
Would say we've had some recent movement on some hiring some drivers, and there's a possibility that we could get back to running full service here in the next month or so, but there's training and assuming no one else leaves, things like that go on. So we want to be careful with that message that we're starting back up. So we want to make sure we get our folks trained. Sometimes we'll get somebody in and they'll immediately go, okay, wasn't for me. So, but we're getting very close. We're hopeful. More to come on that later.
Yeah. Next one is our communication operators, which is our dispatchers, just kind of their quick duties. They answer the phone calls that come in every day. We average about 250 phone calls a day to schedule rides or ask where the bus is at or just different information. They also monitor the radio traffic between the buses. We have 2 different radio systems, one for our handy wheels, one for our fixed routes. They also track the handy wheels, the service, they schedule the rides, they make all the schedules, they complete all the daily paperwork, prepare the bank deposits. They're also able to drive if we need them. So a lot of times our drivers, they'll drive several times a week where one of them's driving, the other one's in there by themselves. They're also back up to supervision when we're shorthanded or vacations. Next is bus driver duties. Well, we have 6 bus drivers that concentrate on the fixed routes, cover the 6 fixed route. We have 8 that cover the 8 buses that go out every day on handy wheels. On the handy wheels, our bus drivers do more than just drive because they assist passengers to and from the bus. They operate the lifts and the people in wheelchairs. We have a lot of people who just cannot go up and down steps. About 40% of our passengers do require the lift. They also, we have to secure the wheelchairs on the bus. They also assist with groceries and packages. We have 6 sub-drivers, what we call them. They fill in a wide range of different duties. It just depends. They cover breaks, they cover vacations, they cover sick leave. 2 of those sub-drivers are also our drivers. They coordinate our safety program. They also do any kind of training. Like right now we're training drivers, so they're concentrating on getting those guys filled in, learning the routes, learning what we do, all the safety features that we require and everything there as well. Next thing we have is other duties besides driving. We also have to maintain our facilities. We have a lot of drivers that had other careers, so we kind of utilize their specialties. But some of the stuff they do is we have one driver that comes in early. He has to line out the bus barn, stage the buses, make sure they all start, make sure there's no issues so that when the drivers get down there, the buses are ready to go. We also have to take care of the maintenance of the buildings and grounds. We have to do the inspections, mow the grass. We have to send drivers out to pick up the trash at the bus shelters, and we usually try to clean our do a deep cleaning on our bus shelters twice a year, which takes a lot of time. We have 55 bus shelters there around town. We also have general maintenance of the facilities. Several drivers have construction stuff, so if we got minor projects, we can get those done without having to hire in from the outside, save the city some money. Also, our drivers help maintain or troubleshoot some of our bus systems. You know, we have camera system on the buses. We got our tracking system on the buses. What we do. Administrative staff, there's just 4 of us. Transit manager, we have an operations supervisor, an operations assistant, and an administrative assistant that handles all the inside of the work. Our service workers, they're the ones down in our bus barn. They're in charge of cleaning and fueling all the buses. It's, you know, make sure everything's clean, ready to go for the next day. They inspect, look for stuff that needs to be fixed. One of them is a part-time with benefits. He works a 7.5-hour day. The other 2, they're just a 4-hour day position. One works in the morning, one works in the afternoon. Then we have a custodian that just takes care of the cleaning up, takes care of our restrooms outside, the bus shelter outside, all the interior stuff, also takes care of our central maintenance downstairs and their cleaning of the restrooms and stuff. Next, we get to the transit budget, which is kind of split into 2 parts. We have capital expense and we have operating expense. Capital expense, so we go to it. That's usually any capital expense is tied to a grant, and and most of them are 80-20 split, where 80% of it's covered by the grant, 20% is where we use our CIP funds to do the match with. Some examples of things that we've done or in process was the bus lift down at Central Maintenance. It was completed back in April. As I mentioned earlier, the 2 hybrid buses that are on order. As well as on the city council meeting this last Monday night, update for our bus wash and also update our security camera system. Those are all matched 80% from grants. Next we get to is our operating expense, which is about a little over almost $2.9 million, but 60% of that is personnel services, salaries, Social Security, all the stuff that goes on with that. Maintenance and supplies is 10%. Contractual services there, it's 11% at $318,000. Just one note out of the contractual services. The administrative charges that the city charges us is $239,000 out of that $318,000. The utilities is just 1% of our budget. And repairs and maintenance of our buses and all that is a little over $500,000, about 18% of our budget.
So, excuse me, I guess fuel is within the materials and supplies, is that where?
Yes, fuel is under that.
And you're being charged $239,958 on basically it.
It's an in and out. I think the next slide's really good about this. Go to the next
It's got
one.
a little more on it.
Detail on this operating.
Yeah, here's our operating stuff. We have an operating grant that we have every year. This year is $1,070,000. The operating grant is matched 50-50. So the FTA will give us $1,070,000. The city has to match that with $170,000. We get state assistance. This year was $52,000, so we have to match that with $52,000. So that's $104,000. We collect about. We're on track to collect about $326,000, what our budget is for this year, which is between those and everything, which is $2,572,000. Additional general revenue that the city has to put in to make up the difference of our budget is about $315,000. That's not matched with any kind of grant or anything. So if you take out the administrative fees that the city charges itself, there's really about $75,000 that the city puts in that doesn't match with any kind of grant for transit.
If you add those three numbers up, you can kind of get the total city. Now this is backward looking, current budget.
Yes, this
So
is
it's not what
this year's
we're talking
budget. It's
about
not next
coming
year's
up.
budget.
But you can add the million, the 52, and then the 326, however you want to, excuse me, not 320, 315. And then you can figure out how you want to look at the 239. But anyway, regardless of all that, it's about, is that 1.4-ish million dollars the city invests in that budget, because you have to have the pure match. You can't, you got to minus your revenue you're bringing in, and things like that when you do those grants.
Do you break down the cost of Handy Wheels versus our regular bus route services?
This year, because Handy Wheels is going more because of our reduced routes and everything, so we're about 55% fixed route and 45% Handy Wheels. Normally, it's about a 60-40 split. That gets you in the ballpark just about every year on what it takes there.
I think ideally, when we've done some studies in the past on transit, we are on the high end of, very high end of our peers when it comes to handy wheel service. We have a lot of handy wheel riders compared to our fixed route.
We run about the same amount of people that Columbia does, and Columbia's more than double our size.
So you got to get a scale of that.
And I've witnessed at the YMCA people that are mobile. They don't have any significant handicap per se, and even they were riding along with maybe a caretaker or someone, and they were teenagers. They were riding handy wheels, and I'm not sure that was the best approach for them, but
A lot of that is, and of course, some of that, with Handy Wheels is for anyone with disabilities, whether it's physical or mental disabilities. So you have to take a lot of that into account. And even with the YMCA, we do have several people that do therapy at the YMCA and stuff for their ailments or whatever it is that we do. We also take them to the Healthplex and other places that do physical therapy as well.
We made an effort, though, in the last few years to have a better process of trying to identify
screening process.
That only goes so far because the nature of the folks signing off on their disability.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, sorry.
Just one other note on that is the administrative charges, we have to subtract that out of deal. We cannot match 50-50 on the administrative charges on our grants. The next slide I got is about diversifying our fleet. We've got here with these 2 Gillig buses on order. They're predicted to average 7 miles a gallon, maybe a little better, which compared to our current buses, which save us roughly, because we do about 25,000 miles, save us about 1,900 gallons of fuel a year. We also, these have a geofencing option on the transmission with battery power. So that way we can pick certain areas to run only on battery power, just like going down High Street. Cut out the exhaust, cut out the noise and everything else. And there'll be other sections around town that we can utilize. In some routes, maybe up to half on battery power and no, just using that. And then currently on our handy wheel side is, we have 10 buses. They're very old, and then we're trying to get to diversify quite a bit there with a couple of high top vans, and that will replace 2 of our cutaway buses. Hopefully sometime next spring or next fall that we can get those. Those are in big demand and they're not making very many of those. And the price has really jumped quite a bit on that. So we have to watch with our matching money on that. 3 cutaway buses are on order, but there is no delivery date. We've got them. We've got the grants for them. We've been approved for it. And we're also trying, as what the first reading there on the city council was, to apply for a 5310 grant that you all seen Monday night. That's to apply for the next round of funding to keep our fleet going on that. Then my last slide here is basically the right bus for the right job. A lot of people have talked about getting smaller buses, different things, but you got to watch on what you got because you need the right equipment for the right job. You know, the Gillig buses, they're kind of the workhorse of transit. If you talked about any transit agency, they'll tell you that. A diesel bus right now, we're averaging about 4.5 miles a gallon. These hybrids, we're estimating to get about 7. Our handy wheel buses, they average about 7 miles a gallon, you know, but they got only about a 5-year lifespan, up to 10 years. We've got one that's 13 currently at the time. But our Gilligs, you know, they're a 12 to 20 year bus. So basically over the same time span, you're spending the same amount of money on cost. But also a note here, our Gillig buses, they'll hold 32 people. 32 people, they're still going to get 4.5 miles a gallon. If you go with a smaller bus for the fixed route, say if you try to use one of our handy wheel cutaway buses, if you put 18 to 20 people on that bus, you're only going to get about 4.5 miles a gallon. So, and plus the wear and tear on the bus, you're going to take away a lot of the lifespan out of that bus. Kind of sums up transit.
Mr. Mash? Is there any questions? Since council,
No, we're trying to
wastewater then?
keep rolling on this if you don't have any questions. We got wastewater next.
All right, wastewater, please.
So we're a 36 employee division. We currently have 3 vacancies. Wanted to highlight the administration division. Right now is just me. I'm the only one to blame for the productivity here. So we've got 21,000 customers. The service area is about 44 square miles. St. Martin's owns their sewer, but we provide contract operations and maintenance. And then we provide wholesale treatment for Holt Summit. So manage the capital improvements, environmental and financial compliance. If you are a developer, you want to connect to the sewer, do a development in town, and that sort of thing, Jefferson City has an approved sewer extension program. So it's a benefit. You don't have to go to the state and go through the arduous task of getting approval from them. You just go to them. It relies on David's got some good experienced employees who do that work, and then I keep DNR happy doing reporting and trying to keep them. A bunch of other administrative things under this includes supporting utility billing folks in collecting delinquent bills. So our the budget for administration is $6 million, but it includes $4 million in debt. So the debt comes out of here. The next group I'll talk about is we used to call them the outside crews, so that would be the sewer maintenance folks. We have 466 miles of sewer main. And then the theme you always hear about Jefferson City is very hilly. So if you change direction or slope on a sewer, you have to have manholes. We have 12,000 manholes. This group does the preventive maintenance and cleaning of the sewers. They open cut repair the old and failing sewers, and then also the ones where the directional drilling guys cause damage to private property. We have the diagnostic group who finds inflow and infiltration sources. They also assist in inspecting storm sewers. And then the group who keeps us in compliance with the dig right law is out of this too. We do all the locates for sanitary and storm sewer out of this group. So we have 17 full-time employees here and just 1 vacancy currently. This group also backs up street departments during the snow and things like that. We generally don't have frontline drivers, but we'll back them up. We'll do the second shift and that sort of thing. So the budget out of this group is about $1.6 million. Next group is the treatment plants. So we have 2 treatment plants. We average about 8.5 million gallons of number 1 and number 2 we treat each day. Again, the hilly topography we've got, there are 31 pump stations outside of the treatment plants to pump the flow there. And then there's countless little components that go along to odor control, blower screens, a lot of things. The major groups inside this work group, operations, they handle the sludge, inorganics, and the disinfection. The maintenance group, they handle everything from complex electronic and electrical devices down to mowing. And then the laboratory pre-treatment group, they're the ones who keep us in compliance for 230 points of compliance that DNR and EPA look at each year.
Eric, if I can interrupt.
Sure.
That is quite an impressive operation over there at the lab. I don't know if all of us on the council has had that opportunity, but you might reach out to some of the new council members or anyone that might want to have a tour of that. I mean, that really shines a light on how detailed this division is and really what they do every day with safety and health and welfare of our community. So it's just quite impressive the time I spent over there.
Be glad to.
Thank you.
I guess one thing I'd like to highlight out of that group as well, if you have a factory or an industry in our service area, we've got a delegated pretreatment program from EPA Region 7. So that allows those folks to deal with us and not have to deal with the feds. And that's generally appreciated. So this group has 17 full-time employees as well. Just talking about how Public Works all works together, so they do all the stormwater sampling for the airport and that sort of thing. Due to all the chemicals and electricity we use, our budget there is about $2.9 million. So this is the whole budget from last year in a group. Again, we are, I guess we would call it self-sustaining. We collect fees and expend the expenditures out of there. The $4.4 million that we're spending in debt service there, obviously that's allowed us to keep the rates pretty reasonable. So since 2000, we've borrowed $77 million and we've paid off enough. We're down to about $33.9 million in principal left on those debts. So the priorities we'd like to do for this upcoming budget year, administration, I'd obviously like to get the big capital projects done with the solids and the Westview pump station. And we heard some good news last week about the state revolving fund. So we were quoted at 1.7% interest rates on that loan over a 20-year period. So we would be able to hopefully close on that and get that rate next year. So we're looking forward to that. The collection systems maintenance folks, it's a lot of just optimizing what they do on maintenance. We think with spend about $30,000, we can get some more diagnostic tools and make our maintenance a little more efficient. Then the treatment plant, again, it's replacing existing equipment, and then if we replace 4 computers and buy an $11,000 software package, we can get better. We would then create a computer maintenance and management software to where we're managing all those thousands of little components much better. So those are kind of our goals for the upcoming budget year.
Do you have any concerns with cybersecurity issues within your infrastructure of software and those kinds of things? And do you feel we're at a good place as far as it relates to security?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We're actually in very good shape. So, and I don't want to give too much detail since we're
I'm not. Yeah.
So everything we do is is essentially separate from, we don't do anything in the cloud. And and also the controls that we do have, we only monitor remote things. If we change something operationally, it's got to be done manually by people. We can't, we monitor and get good alarms and things like that, but we can't actually change, so we couldn't actually create pollution or do things like that without actually physically going to one of the sites and manipulating it manually.
Yeah, there's a trend in utilities, or there has been, to go to cloud-based systems, and we did not because of that.
Not very comfortable with that approach either, so.
We can keep a handle on what we got, but in their defense, some of these large operations, it's quite difficult.
Thank you.
Okay. That's wastewater now. Yeah, one of their things on his pie chart there, if you look, obviously that is a little different than most because of that debt service. So it looks like the personnel, if you took that light blue away, you can see it's just like other divisions. So I combined engineering and admin, since they're fairly closely related, I think. I'll just kick that off real quick. So admin budget is 3 FTEs. That's myself, Angie, and Taylor downstairs. That basically, I'm the manager of the public works, but our administrative staff, Angie's our office manager, staffs these meetings, things like that. But Taylor is Angie's old job, but she manages all the bill paying for public works, whether it's all these various divisions. Lots of paperwork across her desk. I don't know how y'all keep it organized, but they do a great job and trying to keep everybody and tell us when, oh, wait a minute, your budget's getting close on that one. You got to watch that, things like that. But if you look at the admin budget, besides personnel, essentially the other big cost is all of Public Works' fuel is in that budget. So that's about $104,000. That's fuel for non-utility funds. So the utility funds have their own gas budget. So it's, basically people and the gas for Public Works in that budget. Then I'll let David talk about engineering. What I would say that, one thing I focused on, and it's hard to get a handle on, but our staffing issue, and it's everywhere, not just here, but we've all indicated there's several vacancies. We're really lucky in engineering that we have some long-term employees, but they're all getting very, very near that in a career stage probably. When you go to some conference I've been to lately, just kind of show the gap of workers versus, retirees, that kind of thing. And it just continues to grow. So I think as we move forward, we're going to have to be a little more innovative in how we do things because we just aren't going to get the people. And we've seen it in transit. Wastewater had openings. Street has openings. We used to get, and just in my career of 20 years here, we'd have an opening at streets or wastewater. We'd get 30 plus people apply for one opening, and we could have our choice. Now you get 2 or 3 and maybe not very qualified they're very new beginner people of certain age, younger ages tend not to stay with jobs as long as the older workers did. So we have somebody come in, we train them, we got to get them licensed, and they decide they're going to do something else. So it's a constant struggle doing that. And so it's something not just in Public Works, but citywide we need to think about. Just be cognizant of.
So in engineering, there's 12 full-time employees. Myself as the city engineer, we have an administrative technician who works under us, but Angie takes care of directing her. We have 4 civil engineers, 2 designers, and then plan reviewer and stormwater engineer. Registered land surveyor, Rick takes care of that, and Jonathan is a survey technician. We have basically 3 inspectors. One of them is a supervisor, and 2 just construction inspectors. So that's kind of the group that we have. What do we do? So ultimately, a lot of on the the engineering side, myself and the other designers ultimately are taking care of the implementation of the capital improvement sales tax projects. And so that includes design, which brings in our survey, or the survey, which brings in our surveyors, design, project management, construction, stormwater permitting and inspection, a lot of that's state certified if we had federal funds in those. We review all the private development plans that come in for any new development, new business, and then those inspectors not only inspect public works projects, but any infrastructure that will become public in the future. So our inspectors are out there doing that on private sites, the development of private streets, et cetera. And then a lot of stormwater stuff. So we have our MS4 permit that we're trying to keep track of, and so all the things that go with that, inspection of our outfalls, illicit discharge detection, and then the inspection of best management practices for stormwater quality. So those could be whether or not we have detention basins that are working, and then lately there's a lot of smaller stormwater quality basins that are being built and or filtering systems that are getting built that we have to inspect to ensure that those are still working. And then there's a floodplain component, and so we're part of the National Flood Insurance Program, and so there's a lot of permitting that goes into keeping track of what gets developed in our floodplain and our floodway, and so we manage all those things. We're also involved in collecting traffic data and supporting of our Transportation and Traffic Commission. And then, of course, we also assist other departments with infrastructure and site issues, fire department, police department, et cetera. So just a quick look at the budget. Again, we're very people heavy, and so actually 97, almost 98% of our budget is for salaries. We do have stuff in other categories, basically to pay for the software that we use to design our projects, and other services that we need to support that design process. The one thing that is our budget, this past year we had $2,500 for continuing education. We have 8 people within our department that need to maintain certifications or licensure. And so, that works out to be $312 per person, which ultimately, if you're trying to send someone to a class or a conference, that doesn't go very far. And so, ultimately, I think in the proposed budget that number has been doubled. So that does help us a little bit in trying to keep those people in licensure and in certifications. So, happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Thank you very much.
So one question for me, I think so what we try to do is kind of give a what we do type scenario in all these budgets, and we did it last time for operations, and so I know I'm on task to give a presentation to the full council at the budget hearings. So my plan was kind of to make copies of these, give them to everyone, and then just hit the highlights because it's a very short window. So if you guys have a different idea that I should be doing, I appreciate any feedback. And hopefully this was helpful to folks. Give a flavor of what we do.
From my perspective, no, that's more than appropriate. Thank you. All right, traffic calming along Sherman's Hollow, Mr. Bangy.
Yes, thank you. So touch on some of this as we had the discussion earlier with the folks who came in to talk about stadium, but the issue is speeding, and so in much the same way as there's a big hill that comes down to the intersection of Satinwood down Stadium, Sherman's Hollow is kind of a saddle, I'll call it, and so the eastern and western ends of Sherman's Hollow are up on the hill. You come down through a valley, and as you do that, the speeds increase by about 10 miles an hour. And so there was a request from someone who lives, I think, just off the picture there, and the request was actually for a stop sign to be installed at the bottom of the hill. So we don't want to use stop signs for traffic control because ultimately that just breeds, it trains people to not obey stop signs because they come to a stop sign, there's never anyone there. And so they begin to roll through that stop sign, and then they begin to roll through stop signs in other places. And so using that as a means to slow traffic is not a safe thing to do. So we've discussed a couple different things, and actually in the past years, the Traffic and Transportation Commission hears these sorts of requests quite a bit. You know, we have issues all over. And so in a couple of instances a year or so ago, we tried to sort of control traffic by making our roads narrower by using paint. And so if you go on Edgewood Drive up past JCMG, there's an area there that there's parking on both sides, but not a lot of cars parked there, particularly during the day. So that makes that street look very, very wide. And we had some speeding issues there, kind of where Tower Drive comes in. So we went in and put basically striped edge lines, and which also doubled as the parking lines to try to make that road look narrower. We did the same thing over on Tanner Bridge Road from the roundabout there by the Knights of Columbus Hall, going south out of town towards Wardsville. And so again, we experienced some success. We've done some traffic counts since then, and there's a modest decrease in traffic speed, maybe 2-ish, 3-ish miles an hour maybe. And so, but the added benefit on those particular streets is it kind of provides a little bit of space for people to walk, since there aren't any sidewalks on those streets either. So it kind of serves a dual purpose, although it, in terms of traffic calming, it didn't quite do as much as we might have hoped. So we were looking at perhaps doing the same sort of thing here on Sherman's Hollow, but in discussions with the Traffic and Transportation Commission, we decided that maybe something different, we could try something different. And so ultimately what's being proposed is creating a painted center median island, and then also the installation of some little rubber ducks, or those flexible tubular markers, basically to force people to weave around this thing. And so it's designed in the distance that we have in order for that weave to happen, basically should slow traffic down back to the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. And so there is some cost associated with this. I think it's about $3,500 to pay for the paint and the rubber ducks to kind of put this in here temporarily. And certainly, if it was received well and seemed to be working, certainly there could be future projects that would make that more permanent. But we just wanted, since this is kind of a new application of traffic calming in Jefferson City, we wanted to bring it to this committee to get your input before we would take this any further. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I attended that meeting where this proposal was discussed, and for my colleagues who served with me on this committee, I can assure you that the individuals on TNT take these issues very, very seriously. Bill Farr and Jeff Collins, who now chairs it, I mean, they've been on there a number of years, so I appreciate their service in that. But like I say, they take these issues very seriously, so it's not just, pull something out of the air. So you'd like an action item?
Yeah, if you would like to, this would go to the council to sort of implement this, and so if you all would think that we can go this direction.
This would be temporary.
Well, yes, it is a temporary application.
I think we just need some buy-in from the committee, and if they're, it's essentially supposed to be half the council, but if the committee doesn't see an issue with it, it sounds like it's supported by the neighborhood. It is temporary, it could come out. Sometimes you do these things, you do get feedback, hey, what the heck, because, this is a through street, people on the other side of it are gonna show up that may not have heard about it. Just like everything we do, how do you publicize these things? So it's not permanent, and really it's coming out of the street budget to do this. So when transportation traffic has a recommendation to do something a little out of the ordinary, or that's going to cost some more money than a sign, we always like to run it through the council because that's the budgeting authority, and just get your feedback to see if that's something we want to really pursue or go back and talk to them more about it. And I know you were there, Scott.
Any discussion on that, Jim?
No, I think it's you have to do something. Barring some major reconstruction, maybe this will work.
Yes, I certainly think it's worth trying and see how it works, and if it works, do something similar other place.
What makes this kind of application work I think it has the potential of working well here is that there aren't very many driveways along that stretch. And so an application like this would otherwise require a lot of removable parking, but there really isn't any parking demand in this location. So it's actually seems to be, if we want to try something like this, seems to be a good spot to do it.
I think you got the sentiment from this committee. So.
Very good.
Sounds good.
Right, so we'll move forward and just kind of, it's on their scheduling, how we can get that done, so.
Next item, other or old business from committee or staff. Okay. We'll go to reports, and Ms. Cincy, you're on deck.
Morning, thank you. I'm going to run through our monthly report of updates that have occurred in the last month. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. As usual, the reports, I highlight kind of the new stuff in yellow so that way you can follow along with things that have updated since we last met. Our community development block grant for our entitlement funds, we're currently in our program year 2023, which is $290,506. We have to do activities that are based within our action plan that feed into that 5-year consolidated plan, which we're currently working on the next section. I wanted to bring attention to some of the programs that we're kind of doing set-asides for next year. One of the programs is voluntary demolitions. We've identified the old animal shelter at an estimated cost of $57,000 to be able to start doing that demolition process in program year 2024. We also participated in a traffic and transportation committee meeting, which residents had issues with parking along Dunklin. We have budgeted about $67,000 of CDBG funds for next year for public infrastructure, which isn't a whole lot to do a large project. But one of the things that occurred that we identified in the traffic transportation and also through the community is that we could do a parking bump out on Dunklin to be able to provide on-street parking for the community center in that area. And I think the estimated cost was roughly $40,000, which fits nicely into that $67,000 budget. Again, this would start in 2024.
Excuse me.
Sure.
I know Mr. Bangy's had some involvement in that, and are they receptive to that?
Well, the committee this last time, and we'll come to the council, I think on the 21st, is we're looking at installing or putting 2 on-street spots basically just to the east of Marshall Street on the community center side, and we were going to be able to shift around the center paint that creates the gore in the middle, and we were able to put 5 parking spaces on the other side without doing any other physical changes. And so I think the folks who were at that meeting seemed relatively pleased with that solution, but that wouldn't preclude something more happening. But for the moment, it seemed as if they were happy enough with those 7 spots that were being created in that area.
You got a little pushback from them on the bump outs.
Yeah, the bump out, they had mentioned that they wanted to go back and talk to their larger group because it would make some minor changes to how their sidewalk was access their building. And then it also might require us to do some grading out onto their property. And so, I think the committee left it with, if they were to come back and specifically request that the committee would probably not be opposed to doing that. But for the moment, it appeared that maybe they were just going to see how this, these 7 new spots worked for them.
Well, sometimes staff and the city as a whole gets a reputation that we don't hear concerns of people, and we don't take those to heart. And this is an example that was not the case. Thank you.
But it may be we come back next year and do that. So
sure.
And we just, because it takes, we play the long game with the grants. We just go ahead and pencil that in there as if that's what the project's going to do. And if they decide that they don't want that bump out, then we free up that money again and look for a different project to plug it into. Just a way to plan ahead. The other activities, we have a lot of activities going on with the planning side of Community Development Block Grant. Every 5 years, we are required to update our analysis of a fair housing choice plan. We last did this in 2018. We do have a contract with RKG, who's the same consultant that produced our housing study. So they have a lot of our existing data and are kind of building off the housing study to be able to provide this plan. We have gathered data, sent it to them, so the ball is really in their court to start plugging away. They've also are going to reach out to community stakeholders, such as the area board of realtors, some of the nonprofits, and some of the housing developers that we work with. We recently submitted our 2023 annual action plan to HUD, and that's the 2023 funding. It's actually going to be activated in fiscal or in calendar year 2024 for our program year. So the grant year always is ahead of or behind the program year. Consolidated plan for 2024 to 2029. This is that 5-year plan that we have to feed into. We've had a series of public meetings, and it came back to that they wanted to open up every category related to housing, and so that's what we're planning on doing. We do anticipate public comment period for the plan will be September. I'm going to say maybe October, because we think it's going to be late September, but it may push into October, for a 30-day public comment period to allow people to respond to the activities that we're opening up.
Can you send council a link to that?
Yes.
Where we can highlight that in some of our social media platforms?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
I love that. Thank you. Our Community Development Block Grant CARES Act, this is the $413,000 that we received during the pandemic to respond to COVID-19. Maybe if you'll remember, our programs really identified child care facilities as needing assistance. We have spent through most of that funding. We have 2 existing projects open. Kind of our larger project that we're still working on is the Early Explorers Daycare. They're requesting a building expansion project. That way they can accept more kids. We went through their environmental, also their public engagement. We're basically waiting for HUD to give us a notice to proceed before they can start their construction project. I did add a little FYI because it piggybacks off of our existing programs. The state also identified child care facilities as needing some assistance. So within their ARPA budget, they obligated a lot of child care programs, especially for preschool infant daycare. So I put a link on here for the DESE Office of Childhood Grants if you ever get any constituents that they're looking for funding sources. These programs really piggyback off of what we've already started in this community really well, so I wanted to bring that to your attention. Our Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds. We have, as you know, the multifamily affordable housing rental recovery is open. Stronghold received jurisdictional support for DR and for LIHTC. I put a couple of timelines up there just to keep that on your radar. The disaster recovery applications are due August 14th, so next week. And then the LIHTC applications are due September 23rd. LIHTC recipients are announced by MHCC Commission, usually kind of that first or second week of December. We usually go to those meetings, and if you ever have any we can get a list of commissioners as well to advocate for that project. We would really like to get one this year. Jumping over to the historic preservation side, our historic preservation fund grants, we have the Paul Bruin Revitalization Grant. Most of the projects are coming out of their environmental phase, so we're looking to get into that construction. We've had meetings with several project applicants, just basically going through the different sets of rules of procurement. One of the challenges that we've came across is that a lot of the projects require window restoration, and there's just not a whole lot of local entities that do wood window restoration. So we may bundle the projects together, do a larger procurement. That way maybe we can draw somebody from Kansas City or St. Louis that could do those activities. The other thing, we have local historic preservation fund grants that come through the State Historic Preservation Office. We have the West Main Phase 2 Architectural Survey. Stan Tech presented at our Historic Preservation Commission meeting on Tuesday evening. We did have residents of the Lower Jefferson subdivision come out, and it was overall a really good meeting. The reasons why we do these surveys is if there's areas that could be eligible for the National Register, once they get listed, it opens up funding opportunities for property owners to access funds to maintain their property. So we want to make sure that we open up those pipelines. I also didn't make the report because we just found out yesterday that we received funding for a Phase 3 architectural survey. Probably coming to council at the next council for grant acceptance. Based off of how we're doing our budgeting and for the match. These HPF grants are 60-40, so 60% federally funded and 40% match. We will be requesting a supplemental to cover the match for that new grant. If you have any questions about that, we can talk about that more in detail on the side as well. Our state CDBG-CV activities, I think you've noticed across kind of catty corner across the street that construction has started on the EMS facility. So we're excited to be in the construction phase of that, and we'll start doing kind of the reporting angles from requirements for that particular grant, Davis-Bacon payroll review, interviews on site. This other state CDBG-CV projects that we have, we met with Compass Health staff yesterday to get their planning project going. They're doing a feasibility study on getting into the affordable housing market within Jefferson City. So we're working with them on that grant. Transformational housing, we're still waiting because it was in a historic district. We're waiting for the State Historic Preservation Office to sign the MOA. And then the next step is that public comment period, and then we get the authority to use grant funds, and then we can start the project. Community Revitalization Grant Program, it's really still in the kind of the administrative kickoff phase. We've had a couple of training meetings to manage the grant, as well as setting up reporting requirements in a portal. Same with the local tourism asset development grant. Excuse me. Mid-Missouri Solid Waste Management District grants. This is funding that DNR kind of doles out throughout the state within each of the management districts. We received $25,000 to repair and paint 3 glass recycling bins. The one that's currently in the City Hall parking lot is one of the most recent painted ones. If you've seen the other ones, they're in pretty rough shape. So we want to make sure that we maintain those so the bins don't rust out, and then we have to buy a new one. So we have a contract that's currently in the process of being approved for extreme body and paint. It's $18,500, so you won't see that contract at council. The city administrator has the authority to execute that. We're also, so the remaining funds will be spent, will be used to buy the Ripple purple paint and support educational outreach. And if you're not familiar with the Ripple glass program, we provide a lot of kind of in-kind services. We have a facility where the glass is kept, but Ripple pays for the hauling off of that glass. So it's a great partnership to work with Ripple out of Kansas City. We're currently also working with the Mid-Missouri Solid Waste Management District and Commissioner Helsher from Cole County to subsidize household hazardous waste program. The city currently budgets about $19,000, with Cole County contributing $5,500 every year. We're hoping, since we're there's not a lot of HHWs across the state. I want to say there's 12 altogether, but that number may be wrong, but it's in that neighborhood. And there's certain materials that it's against the law to throw away, but there's not a lot of collection facilities. But it's expensive to haul off. So we're trying to get some subsidies to either cover all or some of that $19,000 budget, so we can alleviate the pressure there.
Generally, that's communicated to the public of when those dates, the hazardous waste dates are open. I think they still collect at Hyde Park.
Yes, yes, so that's Hyde Park is the collection facility. We do require members of the public to set up an appointment. We basically get volunteer staff, both from the city, streets contributes, as well as Cole County sends people to work and sort. We provide the training, or we go to HAZWOPER training that's provided by DNR, so that way we have that training to be able to sort the waste. And then we operate the existing contract with Trey Debbie Environmental Services for that pickup. But it is appointment based. We really ask that people do not just dump, because then that becomes problematic. And it's not 24/7 staff, so we just kind of come out and find a mess to clean up. So we're trying to avoid that as well. And that's really all. We still have some of our pending applications out, and then always there's upcoming opportunities that we look at. But I'll be happy to answer any questions of some of the activities that we've completed over the past month.
Any other questions on that? The committee will give me a little liberty before we adjourn. There's been a couple vacant vacant homes that were questionable if they're vacant or not. 1634 West McCarty Street and 1720 West Main as well. And again, also I believe it's 907 Monroe on the corner of in Hickory. If we need some information on that continues to be questionable.
Are you asking if they're vacant?
Yes, and what the long-term strategy is. 1634 West McCarty has a pretty good sized hole in the roof at the front porch. I don't see how that could be habitable.
Sure.
I don't know for sure. So.
Okay. Yeah, I can check on those properties and get the committee an update on the status of those, whether they're dangerous buildings, abandoned, or if they're just not on our radar right now. We can take a look.
Great. And then also for the committee to put on the radar, I'd really like us to start looking at and revisit the capital overlay program as well. See if we can make some changes or recommend some changes to bring to the council to make that a little bit more less restrictive, if you will. So, there's been some developers that have been talking with me about that particular issue itself. So. All right. Any other questions, concerns? Or entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you all.